For a closer look at extremism and understanding its root causes, we're joined by Gus Martin, professor and author of Understanding Terrorism, Challenges, Perspectives, and Issues. I want to thank you so much for being on the program. Let's get back to the summit if we can. What's the most that can come out of that summit in your estimation?
Well, my view is that this is a good beginning, but it is only a beginning in the sense that you've brought together roughly 65 representatives from 65 nations together to discuss ways to counter violence extremism. This is going to be a long-term effort, and it's a good beginning, I think. At least we have everyone in the same room pledging that they're going to move forward over the long haul.
Gus, as you know, what's being said at this summit isn't getting nearly as much attention as what's not being said. The administration is going to great pains to keep religion out of the discussion, and that has Republicans howling. I'll share just some comments. One U.S. Senator, Lindsey Graham, said this, quoting here, "We're in a religious war with radical Islamists. When I hear the President of the United States and his chief spokesperson failing to admit that we're in a religious war, it really bothers me." And another Senator, Ted Cruz of Texas, says the fact the president won't use that language is dangerous. So the question is it dangerous, or are we spending too much time debating the language here?
I think that the president is taking the correct approach in the sense that he's representing the United States, and we cannot declare that we are at war with Islam. These are radical Islamists. It's political Islam that we are at war with, not the Islamic world. And for our political leaders to actually say that we're in a religious war, I think is very dangerous internationally.
You know, Gus, you heard our reports, Nathan, with more of an umbrella look at things, the summit itself. Then the reports from Hendrik and Daniel Kahn about Pakistan. We know that there's terrorism in Afghanistan, in Iraq, Syria, recently in Libya. We're seeing more incidents of it. Of course, Boko Haram, it seemed like they were focused in Nigeria, but the tentacles creeping into Cameroon, neighboring countries there, Niger as well. How do you put out all these fires? It seems like they're burning everywhere.
Well, the concept of the summit is to counter violent extremism. But in these areas where central government control is weak or where the military is ineffective, it's very difficult to put out these fires. Boko Haram operates where the Nigerian army is weak. There's a civil war in Syria, as we know, and also in Iraq, the government soldiers essentially ran from ISIL. So in those areas, when you talk about actually trying to resolve underlying grievances, underlying conflicts, it's going to be difficult to do. And we cannot simply think that we can talk to the young people in these conflict areas because they're already at war.
If you were there, since you've written a book on this issue, what would be your takeaway that you give these people before they left Washington, D.C.?
Well, a couple of things. One is that in the West, that is United States, North America, and in Europe, we certainly can counter the propaganda that groups like ISIL or Al-Qaeda are posting on the internet. We can provide better integration of the Muslim communities in these areas and perhaps end the threat from foreign terrorist fighters entering the war zones. So that is, again, a very strong beginning. Now, when we look into the conflict areas, it's going to be a much more difficult prospect to end those conflicts, but I think it can be done in the long haul.
What about the U.S. president? He said that the international community really needs to address some of the grievances the terrorists tend to exploit in order to blunt them. Of course, some of these issues, you know them well, poverty, corruption, poor governance. You talked about that, weak governance in some of these countries. How do you achieve that? Because in some respects, that's actually tougher than just bombing the groups, isn't it?
It's much tougher. When you talk about trying to resolve the underlying grievances, underlying reasons for terrorism, we do have case studies where that has succeeded. For example, in the Basque area, they achieved some autonomy, which ended the Basque terrorist threat. And there are other examples like that. Perhaps we have to try and do that with some of the disaffected groups in the Middle East. But that requires the resolve of central governments, the strength of will to do this sort of thing. Again, this is going to be a long-term kind of resolution because they do have the initiative at the moment.
Gus Martin joining us from Los Angeles.